Blessings, beloveds. I thought I would come on and just share some comments about Uranus. I did speak about it a few days ago. That was a small audio where I just spoke a little bit about Uranus being stationary, preparing to move retrograde. And there it is there, already in its retrograde motion, which is what the R stands for, right? So every time you see an R at the end of the minutes, get this cursor going, to see all the red R's, so that's implying all these things are retrograde. Pluto, actually this is quite interesting because at the moment as we speak, and some of these planets have been retrograde for a little while, and Uranus is the most recent one to go retrograde. So we have Pluto retrograde. Let me just grab a tool here. Okay. Pluto retrograde, Saturn retrograde, Vesta retrograde, Juno retrograde, Neptune retrograde, Jupiter, Chiron, Uranus, and well, the modes are pretty much almost always retrograde. Okay, so that's the three transpersonal planets at least to begin with, and then Jupiter, Saturn, Chiron. So yeah, there's a lot of retrograde motion happening. And so one of the things to remember when planets are retrograde, very simply put, the invitation is to work with those energies internally, to go within and integrate and explore and feel your way through and be more reflective, consider essentially taking a step back, right? I mean, life is just so interesting, isn't it? Because we have so many rhythms of things going on, at different times relative to the seasons, the weather, our age in life, stages in life, things that are being activated in our own personal chart. Sometimes it appears to be a bit of a contradiction. We have this pulling us externally in that direction, and then we have something else pulling us internally on an inward level and direction, and so it can feel like a bit of a contradiction, but that also could be said for our own natal birth chart. We have what appears to be contradicting messages, but in my understanding, there is no contradiction. It's just simply that there are always numerous layers and levels of things unfolding, and most of which we are unconscious to anyway. When we are conscious, well, to something, or to ourselves for that matter, we have an ability to process and work through things in a very different way. Consciousness also implies awareness, being aware of something. When we are unconscious and unaware, then things seem to be operating outside of our field of control, as it were, and we tend to see that as something that's fated or destined or out of our control, where we can't directly impact something, for instance, right? Particularly if it comes up unexpectedly. But that's where Carl Jung's quote is quite prevalent, the old quote, in saying that he had, as long as we, I'll have to paraphrase, as long as we are unconscious, we will project those unconscious elements within us externally and experience them as fate, right? I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's what he's saying. What does that mean? It just means that the more unconscious we are, the more we experience our life as being controlled or directed externally through other forces, right? So, a lot of planets retrograde at the moment, and so the invitation clearly is to go within, reflect, pause, reconsider, explore, relearn, learn, decondition, move away from. And also, we tend to make a lot of decisions when planets are retrograde as well. It's actually a really powerful time for very specific choices and decisions to be made under the retrograde period of planets, because that's what retrograde planets imply. They appear to be moving backwards from our perspective here on Earth, but in truth, no planet moves backwards. And so the astrological or philosophical or spiritual implication is to turn within and reflect, right? So today's focus is really about Uranus. But I think it's important to note that, we have all these other bodies retrograde at the moment as well. Now, as I mentioned in my previous audio a few days ago, Uranus retrograde is kind of its natural position, if you like, because the other thing about planets moving retrograde, specifically from the evolutionary astrological model, implies doing things differently, doing it your own way, and not needing the consensus reality, consensus structure to dictate to you in which way and how you should be doing things, moving, making decisions, and seeing things, right? It takes us into what we could say, well, particularly relative to Saturn being retrograde, it's the journey of finding the authority within, right? Being able to essentially be your own author about the structures of your life and what you are deciding to do at any given moment, being the authority, right, of your life. So with Uranus retrograde, the one very, very interesting thing to really consider is that, first of all, Uranus corresponds to the long-term memory in our consciousness, right? Mercury corresponds to our everyday sort of memory, short-term memory, linear memory, whereas Uranus holds the memory seeds of everything, something you did 10 years ago, something you did 5 years ago, something you did 100 years ago. So any storyline of any experience of any lifetime, including this one, the memories of that are contained within the Uranus portal. And so when Uranus goes retrograde, because Uranus corresponds to long-term memory, what it tends to do is it tends to stir up or activate that part of our consciousness that is connected to the individuated consciousness as opposed to our subconscious memories. So the memories that we have that, as I said, can speak to hundreds or thousands of years, for that matter, relative to what's retained within us, because the soul does not lose memory or sight of what it's experienced, and that's why each incarnation it decides what it wants to further grow and evolve and work on. That's why it re-meets certain people, certain situations, again and again and again until it evolves through it, right? And Uranus stimulates those memories of those things, and it goes into those parts of our psyche and structure, consciousness, unconscious material, individuated, individualized material that pertains to our own uniqueness, who we are as a unique entity. And when Uranus is retrograde, it sort of can bring up these repetitive kind of themes or thoughts in our mind, right? And the key there is when you get a repetition of things that keep coming up, and the ideas and thoughts that come through could appear to be totally unrelated to the external world, to what's happening in your life at the moment, they are likely to be new ideas and levels of awareness, understanding, consciousness, and ideas that point to your future, as it were, right? That speak to a future with true freedom and true authenticity. And the block that comes in, as it were, is the sphere of Saturn, right? Because the boundaries of Saturn, which is what Saturn corresponds to, boundaries both inwardly and externally, and literally the whole construct of this reality is defined by Saturn. So Saturn, in certain ways, can create this block of those streams that Uranus wants to take us towards. And there's that dog again. She's so loud, that dog. She's my neighbour's dog. Anyway, the streams that Uranus takes us towards, which is the soul's desires, it's connected to the soul's desires, right? From that level of becoming individuated, which perhaps someone might be thinking, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be individuated? It's sort of hard to explain in a few words, but very simply put, it's our evolution through all the different lives that we have, where we just continuously wake up, become more aware of our own authentic self, individualized self. And through that process of becoming more awake and more aware and more in tune with our own truth, our own authenticity, the less we rely upon or need the external constructs of the Saturn world and reality, which dictates and provides authority, as it were, relative to the kind of life one should be living. And, you know, it has many different layers, because there can be the Uranus impulse when it kicks in. It can be very extreme at times, from the point of view of creating complete and utter rebellion in an individual, right? It just depends who the individual is, and when the Uranus call, you know, sort of comes through, right? But with Uranus going retrograde, there is also the tendency to not necessarily needing or wanting to be a part of the consensus society and reality, or belonging to any one type of community or group. You know, the Uranus energy takes us a fair way away from that. You know, it's the more the desire to belong to nobody, belong to nothing. The beauty of Uranus going retrograde as well, because it corresponds to our right brain and that part of consciousness that is giving birth to authenticity, to freedom, to liberation, and how we might integrate that, how we might integrate our life in that, within that field, so that we can actually experience a greater sense of freedom within. It's got nothing to do, really, at the end of the day, with the construct of the external reality, because that's not going to change based on Uranus going retrograde or direct, or having major Uranus transits. The change is always going to be cultivated from within your own consciousness, as it were, right? So if you've been working towards integrating the Uranus energy, for instance, and wanting to cultivate a greater sense of freedom and authenticity with who you are as an individual, as a unique person, that doesn't require you to change the consensus construct of reality out there, because you couldn't anyway. None of us could, and we don't need to. So the message then is that the sense of true liberation and freedom is actually already inside you. It's really just about waking it up or waking up into it, right? And Uranus has that component of detachment. And that component of detachment is very powerful and very useful for those parts in our consciousness that are giving birth to our future, which corresponds to being individuated, being more in touch with your individuality, your uniqueness, right? Because the detached component enables you to detach from the emotional material, emotional stories that you have an attachment to, for better or for worse, right? Whatever it may be. The emotional attachments can keep us quite stuck or conditioned, and can make it quite difficult for us to step out of a particular paradigm or a particular storyline that we've been walking side by side with, forever, or for the last 10 years or for the last 5 years, whatever it may be. That's one of the brilliant qualities of Uranus, and the sign Aquarius as well also has this capacity, particularly because Aquarius is ruled by both Saturn and Uranus, and I've seen this through the years. I've seen some Aquarians, you can see the ones that are more tapped into the Saturn ruler of their sign, with sun sign, for instance, and you can see the ones that are more of the Uranian types, that they are much more integrated with the Uranus rulership of their sun sign, let's say, right? You do see both, and I've seen it very clearly for many, many years. So you'll still see some unusual, different types of qualities of an Aquarian, even if they are more Saturnian based. But as an overall presentation of who they are in the world, and how they show themselves to the world, the ones that are more Saturn based, you'll see that Saturn structure in their life. And I've got someone very close, a family member, who is very much that, an Aquarian, very unique and different in lots of different ways, but very Saturnian as well, quite a conformist, so it just depends on the person. But now I've lost track of the point that I was trying to make. I'll have to get back to it somehow. I'll find my way back to it. I'll have to somehow perhaps repeat some things in order to get back to it. So Uranus retrograde takes us through that journey and that process of giving us the opportunity to find how we might be able to connect to that part of our unconscious, individuated self, if you like, that core, authentic self, if you like, that is not defined or confined by the nature of reality as it appears outside. And it's quite it's really difficult to put into words, actually, because Uranus has this it's unpredictable, it's exciting, it's exhilarating, it's liberating, freeing. It takes us into those zones, and once again, the material that comes up in the psyche, in our consciousness, which we'll perceive as perhaps certain thoughts that come just sort of out of the blue and out of nowhere. We might just have this sudden flash of insight, this sudden thought that we just kind of think to ourselves, wow, you know, where did that come from? I don't normally think like that, you know, this is really unusual for me, kind of thing. It's that kind of thing. But if it comes through as something that uh, is repetitive, right? Just it's the same particular thought that keeps coming through, and you're not paying attention to it, it'll just keep coming through, because that's the component of the individuated consciousness that resides at deeper levels within you, that's trying to bring those new ideas through to you, which is all about evolving and growing and developing, right? And the resistance to it is going to be Saturn, for instance, right? Saturn holds a very tight rope around those boundaries, and Uranus has the capacity to crack things open. No matter how tight Saturn tries to hang on, you know, Uranus has the ability to break those walls, to produce the cracks, and the cracks can be sometimes a little bit shocking, you know, and that's namely because we're not ready for it. And as I said in my previous audio, it's very difficult to be ready for what Uranus will produce, because it comes up very suddenly. It's literally, you know, just out of the blue, sudden, unexpected. I think I've just remembered what I was sort of speaking about before as well, relative to the detachment component of Uranus and Aquarius, who also speaks to the capacity to be detached, which I think is an enormous gift and powerful position to step into, because the components of who we are in our life's experiences, where we are not able to be objective, for instance, where we are not able to be detached, where we are, for instance, the opposite, taking things very personally, having a very personal bias or prejudice position on a individual, on a situation, on persons, for instance, based on our own unconscious biases, and also emotional and psychological, for that matter, insecurities and fears that we have, which is Saturn, of course, and the triggers that are activated through situations we are involved in, or people or persons we are involved in, whether that's professionally or otherwise, can be the catalyst for activating those very things that we suppress internally. And as long as something is suppressed within us, which is Saturn, we will always see it in the outside world, the person opposite us, the person who triggers something very specific in us. And the more unconscious, unaware, and subjective we are, the more we are unlikely to recognize that. And we hold the position of projection and blame and identification out there as that person is the problem, or that person is wrong, or you know, it's I could never do what that person is doing. How dare they do that? How dare they be that? How dare they be free? How dare they not follow the norms and the rules of society? You know, the man-made laws that are dictated by Saturn and all the systems. How dare they not follow that? God forbid somebody might think for themselves and be attuned to natural law, which is Gaia, Mother Earth. So, you know, anybody who holds a very strong Saturnian position, which is unfortunately a lot of people on the earth, will see Uranus and Uranus type of people and Uranus type of situations and experiences as a problem. As look at Julian Assange. There's a lot of people we can point to historically and in the present, right, who are all essentially either demonized or ridiculed, judged, criticized, imprisoned, lots of things like that, for instance, right? Excluded, cast out of society, cast out of what society? The society of Saturn, which has very specific conditioned man-made laws and rules. And if you don't follow those, well, you'll be made an example of, as it were, right? In a system or systems which are entirely corrupt and set up in very specific ways to deter and prevent people from being free, being awake, being aligned with their truth. Because if everybody was aligned with natural law and the truth, all these Saturnian systems would fall within 2 seconds flat. They are falling, but it's just taking a long fucking time because, unfortunately, consciousness, individuation, waking up doesn't happen overnight. So, the more humanity wakes up, Uranus, the more these enslaved systems will be abolished, but it just takes time because we are living on in a physical reality, which is governed by Saturn, which rules time. And because this reality is governed by Saturn and has certain laws and principles pertaining to Saturn from the man-made perspective, those things can't be overturned very quickly. It takes time. And that's just where we're at from a collective evolutionary perspective. But the beauty of being in touch with Uranus energy, and particularly as it goes retrograde, you have the potential and the opportunity to experience your own freedom within you. And the exterior doesn't need to change necessarily for you to be able to feel that. That's the point. And you can be the observer, which is what Uranus Aquarius does very well. It has the most magical, potent capability to observe. And observation is a very powerful position to be in because you are not identifying with anything necessarily. You are merely observing it. You're aware of it, you are observing it, and you are not being pulled in any one direction, but simply standing in a space where you direct through your own observations. You make the choices consciously. So that's a very powerful position to be in, right? And the Uranus retrograde, once again, it helps us tap more into those sorts of journeys, more into those sorts of abilities, cultivating and working with the ability to be more detached, to be more objective, to not identify with certain storylines or paradigms or apparent structures and themes and whatever it is that's being projected and played out on that 3D earth plane. That's that game of the 3D paradigm. That's just one level of what appears to be life, right? That's just one level of the expression of life as projected through the world of Saturn. It's not the end game. It's just one part of the game. And you can step outside of that and choose to live completely free and authentically through the integration of Uranus. And again, that doesn't happen overnight, because we need to remember that every single one of us have been conditioned. Every single one of us, not just from this life, from many, many lifetimes. So to break down conditions, which is the work of Uranus. Uranus is the planetary body that helps us break through conditions. The conditions that are set up in our psyche, as it were, from our own experiences through this life and many others, are very dense. Saturn rules the density of this reality. They're very, very strong structures in our psyche. It's not particularly easy to penetrate through those conditions and suddenly break them down and realize the truth. It takes it takes a long time. It takes journeys of continuously chipping away at the conditions that have been set up, that we have set up, that we have either been subjected to or have chosen to be in those particular spaces at different times with different situations. Because we need to experience life in all the in all ways, all experiences. We just don't do it all in one lifetime. In one lifetime you could be a police officer. In another lifetime you could be a serial killer. That's why I really appreciate the quote, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. There couldn't be a more accurate sentence or quote to express the truth of, reincarnation, for instance. I mean, how could it be that we just have one life and one life only? Where does all this, all these past memories come from? The fact that we re-meet certain people and situations again, and some people are completely asleep to that, completely unaware, and many people are not. Many people are aware. They have a sense. In my own life, every relationship I've had on a personal, intimate level, I've been with every single partner before, and I even know specific details and story lines to those relationships I had with those people in the past, and why I re-met with them this lifetime to work through what needed to further be evolved within myself. Those people only show up because I, as a soul, have chosen to continue to work on those lessons for my own soul's growth, as is the case for each of us. So the conditioned layers that we have, which is Saturn's domain, are very, very strong layers within our psyche, and once again, they're not easy to penetrate through. It takes more than just reading something in a book or having one astrology reading or something like that, although sometimes there are moments, and these are complete Uranian moments when you have this moment, when somebody says something to you, and I'm not talking about something simple, I'm talking about something that would have, a level of truth and wisdom within it to some extent, right? Or something you read in a book, or something an astrologer points to in your chart, when you have a reading with them. There are those little moments where you have these sudden aha moments, as they are sometimes referred to, or a sudden flash of insight, like a light bulb goes off in your head, like electricity, like boom, it just explodes, and suddenly the veil is lifted, or one of those conditioned layers has just been completely fucking cracked open. And that can be sometimes shocking, sometimes it can be traumatic, and sometimes it can be completely exhilarating. And exhilarating, why? Because it removes some shackles that have been sitting on your back or around your neck, for instance. And once again, all these themes I'm talking about, they are all Uranus type of experiences and themes. And when Uranus goes retrograde, it gives us that path, that space. It opens that door into potentially going into those layers within ourselves and having sudden things awaken inside us, whether that's through something we've read or a dream we had, an experience we're having in our current relationship with somebody. It could be triggered in a myriad of ways. So when you have a repetitive sort of thought coming up that challenges that part of you that is conditioned in a particular way, which is Saturn, and the repetitive sort of thought that seems either unrelated to the reality that you're used to living, or difficult to accomplish or step into because it seems just too far away from what reality is about as it's presented through the consensus. It's very much, it can generate a frustration inside you, right? Quite a deep frustration, because there's that part of the Uranus component of your consciousness which has a glimpse in different possibilities, right? About your future, for instance, and the position that a lot of people will take, which derives out of fear and insecurity, Saturn, will be linked to things like, if I take that path, I won't have that support anymore, that connection to those things anymore, to that person, to those persons, to that system, etc. And so it triggers a sense of feeling perhaps alone or isolated, because it's not the norm, right? It's outside of the norm. Anything outside of the norm is going to bring up that matter of you're kind of doing it on your own, as it were. To stand in your true authenticity and individuated self, you need to do that alone. You're not going to do it with everybody else. It's your own personal, unique journey, right, of stepping into your own truth. And no one can tell you what that is. Only you can figure that out yourself. There are pointers along the way and things that will facilitate and be catalysts and maybe even support certain things for you along the way. But fundamentally, you can only step into that yourself, and no one can do it for you. And it takes balls, it takes courage. It's a lot easier to belong to a consensus reality where you are, just associated with what everybody else is doing, what everybody else is thinking, what everybody else is following. It's just a lot more comfortable to be in that world, because you're just, it's kind of like, everyone's doing it, everyone's following that, everyone's living that way, or whatever it is, however you're, trying to justify it in your own head. And that gives a false sense of security to people. It is a false sense of security, because at the end of the day, if that thing that you believed in, that thing that you were following, that system that you were a part of, if that just disappears, it's then the rug is pulled from under your feet. And where are you when that happens? Where's this security that you had yourself hooked into? Where's it gone? That's why Uranus cultivates and establishes that deep sense of true, authentic freedom from within, and is not dependent on anything outside of itself to bring that to it. That's why I say that the journey is our own journey. It's how we do it. It's how we step into that. It's the questions we ask. It's the answers that we find ourselves. It's the truth that shines and speaks through your heart, that you can feel, that is beyond the things that you ascribe to or subscribe to around security and following a particular narrative or model, etc. So anyway, anyone who works with Uranus energy, as I said, will feel somewhat isolated at times, or alone at times, and for certain people that's more difficult than it is for others. There are certain people that are so independent, right, and love their freedom and have the courage to sort of step outside the little box and just do their own thing, and couldn't give a fuck about what anyone thinks or says, right? And I absolutely take my hat off to them. And there are those that are just very codependent. Simple example, so many people can't bear to be alone, so they just stay in a relationship that's completely toxic, that's unhealthy, that brings them no joy. I'm not saying that you should be blissed out in your relationship 24/7. That's not possible either. But there are just some people that can't be alone. And so they'll just, attach themselves to a person or a system or a community or whatever, just in order to feel that sense of false security, as I call it. They'll see it as security, but it's false security, because it can be broken apart at any moment, and Uranus is the one that will break it. So it's always interesting to consider some of these themes, when Uranus goes retrograde, because when it does go retrograde, it also then starts to possibly activate material from the past that's contained in our long-term memory. Could be a sudden thought, a sudden intuition that you have. Uranus is intuition. And when that happens, it's really about helping the soul just integrate into a more free future that reflects its own evolutionary intentions that have basically been suppressed by the Saturn archetype previously. Those are my thoughts on Uranus retrograde, which maybe useful for you. I hope they are. Love to hear your thoughts and experiences and reflections over time, whether it's once you hear this or whether it's later on, either or. Always interested to hear what you guys think and where you guys are at with your own experiences as well. Furthermore, once again, very important to look at where Uranus is in your birth chart, because it is that area of life that Uranus will bring up all those themes that I mentioned. It is through that area of life where those themes can be experienced. So, each house in the birth chart has quite a few different layers to it. Most of you, I would say, are very aware of what each house means. But there are, depending on whether you are looking at the chart from a Hellenistic perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, from an esoteric perspective, there are different layers to the houses as well, and it's just really good to just give some time and consideration to what Uranus is activating in whatever house of your birth chart it's at. Because, for example, if it's in your 7th house, it's clearly going to speak to your world of relationships, right? And that can be business partnerships as much as it can be intimate relationships, just to use a very simple example. But because it is the 7th house, and the 7th house typically is the area of the chart where we completely project that energy onto those around us, namely one-on-one interactions. So it would be very typical then, if you've got Uranus in the 7th house, for you to be seeing a lot of this in your partner's behavior, let's say. That wouldn't be uncommon at all, and it is through the interaction of that partner and that relationship that you are somehow experiencing that energy. If that partner wasn't there, you wouldn't be seeing it and experiencing it in that way at all. So it's just important to consider, each house, just how different each house is, and the multiple layers that each house represents. As I've said before, Uranus is in my 4th, which it is in this chart here as well. And so that has brought in, because Uranus has been in my 4th house for a few years now, that's directly correlated to my family, my strongest security, which is sort of, I don't know if security is the right word, but I suppose it could be a word that could be used. But the strongest connection I've had in this lifetime with anybody is with my father. And many of you are aware of that, some of you may not be. And Uranus hitting my sun and going through my 4th meant that I had to release my dad, right? Because he had to leave this world. And that was the biggest shock, Uranus. Even though obviously I knew that one day it was going to happen. We all know that one day our parents are going to leave, this world. We are going to leave this world. It's just the inevitable, experience of this life, right? It's going to happen to all of us. So it's not that, right? I know that. Logically, I know that. But this has got nothing to do with logic. This has got to do with the shockwave that ripped through my entire heart and soul in ways that I could never even articulate. There's a lot I could say about it, a lot, but I just don't really want to right now. Just anyway, that's just an example. And I've still got Uranus in my fourth, and it's still reflecting quite a few things about all things to do with fourth house, which are many different things, by the way. It's not just family. It's many things to do with your own core center and self from a soul level as well. So I'll leave it there, and I will come back soon and share some more. Sending you all much love, and be interested to hear how that new moon in Virgo sits with all of you. It is squaring Mars. I've already seen Mars in Gemini do his thing. Some impulsive, aggressive words being directed here and there. I've noticed a few things. So it's almost inevitable, but we need to be aware of that within ourselves, I spoke about that during the new moon in Virgo. So, all right, see you guys soon. Bye for now.